study this morning is in the 6th chapter of Isaiah, verse 9. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 9. Ned, would you word prayer for us this morning?
Our dear and Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this beautiful word day that we have. We come and have fellowship and learn more about your word. We pray, Lord, for those who couldn't be here today because they're sick. We pray for their health that will be improved. We pray for those who have chosen not to be here that you might be able to do something to touch them or bring back. Pray you'll be with all the teachers this morning as they teach, so that we as students might be able to learn and apply it to our lives. We can be better Christians. Forgive us for our sins, and know we sin often and fall short of thy glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We're going to try to get through the 6th chapter and get into the 7th chapter because there's two, what George Sterling used to say when he was teaching classes. He talked about the big ideas. And remember that, Norma? The big ideas. Well, there are a couple big ideas in these two chapters. One is that idea of the hardening of Israel. And we started on that last time. And then in the 7th chapter, Isaiah gets an instruction to prophesy, to interact with King Ahaz. There, just a little historical event there. And in his interaction with Ahaz, king of Judah, and this Ahaz wasn't a good guy. He was not a good king. He was not a righteous king. He goes into the prophecy of the Savior. In the prophecy of one that would be born of the Virgin. And of course that's a key. That's the very essence of the Christian religion, right? That's the very essence of Christianity. And so we want to get into those two big ideas here today. Now, Isaiah had last week, just to refresh our memory, last week Isaiah had this vision of something going on in heaven around the throne of God, and the question was asked of Isaiah there in verse 8. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" God speaking there. Who will go for us? The plurality of the Godhead identified there. Who will go for us? And Isaiah said, "Here am I, send me." And he said then in verse 9 is where we start. And he said, "Go and tell the people, hear ye indeed, but understand not. And see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy. And shut their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their hearts, and understand with their heart, and convert, or be converted, and be healed." Now, as we think about that passage, God seems to be saying that these people's hearts are going to be hardened. Now, how fair is that? How fair is that? that these people's hearts would be hardened. Matthew 13. Let's look at Matthew 13 for a moment. Jesus here speaking. Matthew 13, beginning with 13. He said to his inner ring disciples, he said, therefore, speak I to them in parables. And he's talking about the general crowd. Because they see not, in hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing ye shall hear and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. Now, Jesus said his experience there, teaching these people who, they should have understood. They should have had some knowledge of prophecy, and they should have understood, but they didn't, or they wouldn't. Now, he wasn't he wasn't applying that to all the Jews, because some of them did listen, some of them did understand, some of them did try to understand and did understand. So here Jesus is quoting this from Isaiah the prophet, there in the 6th chapter of Isaiah. But, how does that work? And I guess, how fair is that? That these people, at some point in their, as a race of people, they just were almost, I guess, in one sense, condemned for not being able to understand. Now, how does that work? Ned, how does that work? Well, let's go back to Pharaoh in Egypt.
That's what I was going to say, Bill, because I don't understand that either. It doesn't really seem fair, because he made Pharaoh's heart hard too. And I'm not saying it's not fair, but I wonder too.
Well, let's just talk about this for a while here. Pharaoh, when Moses was dealing with Pharaoh and trying to extricate the children of Israel from Egypt, Pharaoh hardened his heart how many times? Well, wait a minute. Pharaoh hardened his own heart how many times?
Several times.
Around 10 times. Okay? And then, what happened after that? God hardened his heart. Right?
So you're saying they did it first to themselves and then God did it.
Yeah. Now, how many times had God, how many cycles did Israel go through this, repenting, then God blessed them, and then they became evil, and God punished them, and then they repented to some extent, and then God, blessed them. That was kind of the cycle, wasn't it?
Because every time the things would go good for them, they would forget God.
Yeah,
Start acting up again.
yeah. So,
If that didn't happen,
If what didn't happen?
If the hearts wasn't hardened like in Egypt or in the New Testament with the Jewish people, he couldn't have showed his power because he showed his power over all the other gods in Egypt, and then he showed his power with Jesus. But if they would have known, then he couldn't have done that. I mean, Jesus wouldn't have died in the New Testament for our sins, and in the Old Testament, everyone wouldn't have known that he was the only God.
Well, God could have demonstrated his power in a thousand different ways.
Yeah, but how would we have been saved?
How would what?
How would we have been saved if Jesus didn't die on the cross?
Well, that's a question for that's a question for Herschel.
On the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, God made his command upon Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Let my people go. Repeatedly. He would not do it. So his refusal to do what God commanded or required of him, God in that sense hardened his heart. God did not deliberately and willfully make him do something that he didn't want to do.
Is there a point, however, when, people keep rejecting God and rejecting and rejecting? Is there a point at which there's no return? Yeah. Now, as that applies to Israel, okay, in that context of what you said, what does Jesus mean by saying in Matthew? What does he mean by saying that these people have rejected what I've said, and this is fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, if God had treated the Israelites the way he treated Sodom and Gomorrah and the Canaanite people, if he had treated in the justice of God, God got rid of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And he got rid of the Canaanite tribes in his scheme of justice. And the scripture indicates that Israel was every bit as God is every bit as bad as those people, and yet he preserved at least a remnant. Had he treated the Israelites the same way as the rest of them, what would have happened? The Jewish race would have been obliterated. It would have been wiped out. There wouldn't have been you wouldn't have seen a Jew on earth, right? So let's go back to this question. Jesus seems to be saying, or quoting Isaiah, saying, well, God had just really punished Israel in a way that most of the Jews aren't going to, return to God. But there'd only be a remnant of them, right? But at least the Jews as a race had an opportunity. What about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? Tyre and Sidon. They didn't, none of their descendants had any opportunity, right? I mean, those races were wiped out. So, this is Paul, in the Roman letter, calls this a mystery. Okay? This phenomena of God's dealing with the Jews, he calls it a mystery. In the 11th chapter, 25th, 26th verse. And it is a mystery. I mean, it's hard to get your mind wrapped around the fact that God treated the Jews in a little different way than he treated Sodom and Gomorrah and so on.
We know why.
We know why. Well, why?
Because in using this remnant to bring Christ to Christianity.
Okay. Not only that, but there are Jews today. There's a Jewish race today, right?
Yeah, but they're not receiving the same treatment that we see back there.
Right. 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 Now, you know, as you read the history of the Jews, you study the history of the Jews from the time of Isaiah this way, think of what happened to Israel and to Judah. I mean, what happened to those people? Assyrian captivity for the northern tribes, right? And that wasn't good. And those people never came back, right? Now, the Assyrians left some of them there, and then they brought other people in, and the Jews got mixed up, you know, racially got mixed up with the other folks, and we then ended up with the Samaritans, right? Now, of course, the Jews hated the Samaritans. The Samaritans hated the Jews. You know, the Samaritans were a mongrel group. So, but think of the history of the Jews from that point on, from Isaiah on. How many times did other nations massacre the Jewish race? In the intertestament period, weren't the Jews under assault from various people? I mean, they were just under continuous assault. What about the Romans?
Before or after they murdered Jesus?
Pardon me? What?
Says it's before or after they murdered Jesus?
Well, it was, I mean, during the period between the Old Testament, the 400 years when God was silent in terms of prophecy. You know, from Malachi to, you know, Matthew, that period of 400 years, they were continuously under assault. And then during the Roman period, after the crucifixion of Christ, after their rejection, what did the Romans do to Jerusalem? Killed. It's estimated they killed over 1 million people. Some historians say they crucified 30,000 young Israelis on the walls of Jerusalem before they tore it down. Now, why? What do you mean why? That's Rome. The Jews gave Caesar's trouble all along. I mean, they were, wouldn't you have hated to be Pilate or any other Roman authority that was to manage the Jewish folks? That would have been a tough job, because but So, as Herschel said, Rome had just gotten tired of the rebellion of the Jewish folks. And so they... Now, what do you... I may be going into dangerous waters here, but what about the situation with Hitler, where 6 million Jews were killed? I mean, just think about that for a moment in terms of, God's dealing with this Jewish nation. And of course, the 1948 establishment of when the peoples of the nations the leaders of the nations got together and decided to, put together a territory that the Jews would be, returned to. Still under assault, right? Big time. So, Paul says that there's in Romans 11, there's a mystery surrounding all of this. And I'm not sure I understand all of it. Maybe some of you understand all of it, but it's
But God knows everything.
What's-
What you say. The Jewish people seem to be very stubborn
And arrogant.
well,
But they always came back to God, asking for forgiveness. But the people at Gomorrah, at the time of Gomorrah, eased their mind, and they didn't seem to care, even when they said, well, these are angels. They didn't care.
yeah.
They just kind of ignored, what God spirit. They didn't care whether it was God or whoever it was.
Well,
That was their mind.
well,
They were so bad that they couldn't find 10 people,
yeah.
religious people
Yeah.
in the city.
And in Israel and Judah and the Jewish people got so bad that couldn't find very many folks. So I'm going to just leave it at there's, that at least I don't understand all of God's dealing with the race of Jews, but what I do understand is when God gave Isaiah the instructions, he said, and let's just read that from verse 8 on. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said, here am I. Then I said, here am I, and send me. And he said, go and tell this people. Okay? We mentioned this last week. Go and tell this people, not my people. They were no longer his people as a race, as a nation. And then verse 10 again, and make the heart of this people fat. Make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and be converted, and be healed. Now, Jewish people the gospel is available to the Jewish people. It's available to all nations. And so, it's available. But as a race, they have no special place, no preference. In fact, in some respects, as a race, God has continues to punish the race in some respects. Verse 11, then said I, Lord, how long? Now, Isaiah is kind of getting into a questioning mood. How long? When are all these things going to happen? And he answered, until the cities be wasted without inhabitant. Well, the fact is, the Assyrians did waste the northern tribes of Israel. And 100 years later, the Babylonians did waste Jerusalem and the southern tribes. He said, until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, and houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate. It was going to be a wasteland. And happened during the Assyrian captivity of northern tribes, the Babylonian captivity, although some of the Jews came back from the Babylonian captivity, came back and re-inhabited Jerusalem. And the Lord have removed men, and the Lord hath removed men. The question is, how long? How's this going to happen, you see? How long? When is this going to happen? Well, the Lord hath removed men far away. The tribes, the people were removed into Assyria, majority of them, and then be moved far away, at least from their native land. And there be a great forsaking in the midst of the land. A great forsaking. Obviously, the temple was gone. Of course, it was rebuilt under Cyrus, the Persian king. Verse 13, but yet in it shall be a tenth, a remnant, a portion, and it shall return and be eaten. And even the remnant, when the southern tribe, some of them came back from Babylonian captivity and came into Jerusalem, what was the condition? Well, what kind of conditions did they come under?
Conflict from the enemy, the outsiders, but the city was in ruin. The wall was down. There was no temple. They were stopped from scratch.
The city was in ruins. The wall was torn down. Of course, no protection. I believe there's a dude by the name of Sanballat. You recognize that name? Sanballat gave them trouble. They were under political duress from the rest of the nations around about. They finally got, under Nehemiah, finally got the wall together, and then the temple. They got the temple together, but then, it wasn't. It wasn't a piece of cake. It wasn't a walk in the park. It wasn't a good situation, and never has been a good situation for the Jewish people. So he says there in verse 13, but yet in it shall be a tenth, a remnant. And what a motley crew that must have been. And the remnant, and it shall return and shall be eaten as a teal tree and as an oak whose substance is in them. When they cast their leaves, so the holy seed shall be the substance thereof. There will be a remnant. I think that's what that's all about there. And then in But yeah, yeah. But 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 it would be they would be sprouts as opposed to the mighty oak kind of thing. You, all of us have seen cut down some certain trees and think you got rid of that tree. Sprouts come up, and then every spring you cut the sprouts off. And that's kind of that was kind of the way Israel was, the situation with Israel. And somebody was always cutting off those sprouts. And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. Now, in chapter 6, God gave Isaiah some prophecy, spoke to him during the time of Uzziah. Now here the grandson of Uzziah, here Isaiah is still on the scene there. And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up against Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. Now look at this. Here the northern tribes made a deal with this Syrian, not Assyrian, the Syrian king, and they're going to go up together. They're going to go up against Judah. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Here, these Jewish people here in the northern tribes, they made a deal with Syria, and now they're going to go up and beat up on the southern. Yeah. Now, there must be a little history behind this, because I think the king of Syria and the king of northern Israel figured out that as long as there was a person in the lineage of David on the throne of the southern tribe, there wouldn't be any cooperation there, because see they were figuring on going against Assyria. Okay? And they were attempting to replace this king in the lineage of David. Now, how successful were they going to be? Just think about it. How successful would they be? Huh? There was no way they could be successful. Why couldn't they be successful? Jesus was identified as the son of David, right? Okay? So there was no way these two kings could replace. See, they had in mind, I think they had in mind, replacing this child of David, this lineage, this person in the lineage of David with, in fact, they do. It does say there that they were going to replace him, but that would have been going against the entire scheme of God's dealing with Israel down to the time of Christ, and of course that couldn't have been successful there. Now it wasn't too many years later that the Assyrians did in fact capture northern Israel, after this particular time. So here's Isaiah comes on the scene. And it was in verse 2, or the latter part of verse 1, they couldn't prevail against it. God was in that mix. And it was told the house of David. Now there, you see, that's kind of gives us some idea of what was going on here. And it was told the house of David. See, there must have been some intel, some intelligence, coming into Jerusalem, that they were trying to get rid of the dynasty, the David dynasty, the David lineage of kings. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. Now Ephraim, northern Israel, was oftentimes referred to as Ephraim. And his heart was moved, that is, this shook up the king of Judah, stationed at Jerusalem. And his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with wind. I mean, he was swaying, and he was swaying in the wind, so to speak. Didn't know what to do. Was frustrated and I suppose discouraged. Now remember, according to the Jewish history and the scriptural, according to Scripture, this guy Ahaz was not a good king. He was an evil guy. We could go to the history in Kings and Chronicles to verify that. But he was a bad king. And then in verse 3, then said the Lord unto Isaiah the prophet, Go forth now and meet Ahaz, thou, and Shear Jeshub thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. Now Isaiah was to take his son and go meet Ahaz at a specific spot on the map. He had his GPS, signals right there. There's your pinpoint. You go meet him there. And say unto him, and God tells Isaiah what to say. He says, Take heed and be quiet. And say unto him, Take heed and be quiet. Now, what kind of a message is that? Take heed and be quiet. Just that's a pretty good way. That's a pretty good way of saying it. Just take heed and be quiet. Now, fear not. Neither be faint-hearted, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands. Now, these two, who's he referencing there? Syria and northern Israel. And he says the smoking firebrands, these smoking firebrands, the two tails of these smoking firebrands. Now, I guess the way we could describe that is, have you ever had a firecracker that just fizzled? Don, you probably were into fireworks. Not much. Well, somebody in the audience probably was. In other words, he's describing a couple of people that have fizzled out. They're just, they at one time, these people were, they were really they were really explosive, but now there's just some smoke behind them. They're fizzling out. And he says, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands, don't have to worry about them. For the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and the son of Remaliah, don't worry about these, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying. Now, he said that, they've taken counsel against you, but and here's what they said. Let's go up against Judah and vex it. That is, give it a bad time, destroy it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabeel. See, they had in mind going to replace the king, some other dude that wasn't of the line of David, and that's not going to happen. God isn't going to let the throne of David dissolve until the son of David, the real son of David, comes along in the person of Christ. You see. Well,